A distant dog barks in the background, and all seems peaceful in the stillness. But in the house at the end of the block, something far from peaceful is about to unfold. The camera zooms in on the front porch of Grace's home, where she stands facing Linda, the new HOA representative. The tension is almost palpable as the two exchange heated words. Linda's face twists in disapproval, her posture rigid with authority as she points an accusatory finger at Grace. "You think you can make all this noise and get away with it?" Linda's voice is sharp, cutting through the quiet of the night. Grace, visibly taken aback, tries to explain. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." There's no noise, but Linda isn't listening. Her eyes narrow with judgment, and her voice rises. "It's this noise. I can hear it through the walls, and I'm not the only one. You've been warned, Grace. This neighborhood has rules." Grace's heart races. She's done nothing wrong, yet Linda is relentless. There's a flicker of panic in her eyes, but she tries to hold it together, glancing over her shoulder at the family inside. She can feel her pulse quicken as Linda steps closer, invading her personal space. Then, suddenly, Linda's demeanor changes. Her voice drops, her lips curling into something more dangerous than the cold anger before. "You're not going to make me look bad, are you?" she threatens. "Because if you do, I'll make sure you regret it." Before Grace can respond, the argument explodes. Linda's hand shoots out, shoving Grace back onto the porch steps. Her heart pounds in her chest as she stumbles, but the shove isn't what catches her off guard, it's the sharp glint of something in Linda's hand. The camera pulls back to reveal the weapon, a knife, gleaming ominously under the porch light. Grace freezes, her breath caught in her throat. The reality of what's happening sinks in. In one swift motion, Linda lunges. Grace's world explodes in chaos. The camera cuts to black. Quotation: "She thought we were just another quiet family, she didn't know we were watching." The sun sets gently over the suburban neighborhood, casting a warm golden hue on the neatly manicured lawns and calm streets. It's a place where everyone knows each other, where quiet evenings and friendly waves are the norm. The Grant family had called this place home for years, and for the most part, it had been everything they'd ever hoped for, a peaceful sanctuary from the chaos of the world. James, a loving father, works as an architect. He's dedicated, driven, and proud of the life he's built for his family. But more than his career, it's his relationship with his daughter, Grace, that defines him. Grace, a sweet 17-year-old girl, was born with cerebral palsy, which affects her ability to walk and speak. Though her disability made her life more challenging, it never dimmed her spirit. With the constant love and care of James, Grace had found a way to embrace life. Her courage and smile were enough to light up any room. Their home, a cozy 2-story house with a red door and a garden full of wildflowers, was their world. It was a place where Grace could be herself, where James could protect her from the outside world and the challenges she faced. Their routine was simple but filled with warmth. James would pick Grace up from school, they'd eat dinner together, and every evening, they would sit on the porch, watching the world go by, talking about everything and nothing at all. However, their peaceful existence was about to be shattered. The arrival of Linda, the new Homeowners Association, HOA, representative, marked the beginning of their troubles. Linda moved in a few houses down, her arrival immediately drawing attention. At first, James thought nothing of it, just another new neighbor, a passing acquaintance at best. But Linda wasn't like the others. She had a certain air about her, an aura of superiority that made people uneasy, especially when she quickly began making waves with the HOA. She scrutinized every little detail about the neighborhood, sending letters and making calls, imposing rules and regulations, questioning everything. People talked about her behind closed doors, her cold demeanor, and her obsessive need for control. But when Linda began to target the Grant family, things took a darker turn. At first, it was small things, slight complaints about noise levels. When Grace accidentally dropped her book one morning, Linda was quick to knock on the door, demanding James control the disturbances in the neighborhood. At first, James tried to brush it off. "It's just a book," he'd say, but Linda's persistence was relentless. Over time, her demands grew bolder, her accusations more severe. James, a patient and understanding father, knew that Grace's condition meant she couldn't always control the noises she made. Sometimes, she would drop things or laugh a little too loudly when watching her favorite TV shows. But it wasn't anything that should have drawn attention, let alone a complaint. Yet, Linda seemed determined to make a mountain out of a molehill. One evening, as James helped Grace with her homework at the kitchen table, he noticed something unsettling. Linda was standing across the street, her gaze fixed firmly on their home. James felt an odd sense of discomfort, an eerie feeling that something wasn't right. His protective instincts kicked in, but he didn't know what he was dealing with yet. The next day, it got worse. Linda knocked on their door again. This time, she wasn't just complaining about noise. She was accusing Grace of violating HOA rules, even though those rules had never been clear. "I've received multiple complaints," Linda said coldly. "Your daughter's behavior is disturbing to the neighbors, and if it continues, I'll have no choice but to take action." James tried to reason with her, explaining that Grace's disability made certain things difficult for her, but Linda wasn't interested in understanding. She didn't see Grace as a young girl struggling with a condition she couldn't control, she saw her as an inconvenience, a threat to her idea of a perfect neighborhood. Despite his best efforts to keep the peace, it was clear that Linda had her sights set on Grace. Each encounter grew more tense, and James could feel the mounting pressure. But what could he do? He didn't want to escalate things, but it was becoming impossible to avoid Linda's scrutiny. As weeks passed, Linda's complaints became more frequent, and James' tolerance began to wear thin. He found himself looking over his shoulder, wondering when the next knock would come. He had always done his best to protect Grace, but now, the very thing he'd worked so hard to shield her from, the outside world's judgment, was creeping in. Evidence: the setup reveals Linda's growing antagonism, showing how she uses her position to target Grace. The story also hints at the deep emotional strain it puts on the family, especially James, who wants to protect his daughter at all costs. It was a quiet Wednesday evening when the knock came. Grace was sitting on the living room couch, watching one of her favorite shows, while James sat at the dining table, working on his sketches. The knock was firm, almost insistent, and echoed through the house. James, startled, glanced at the clock. It was past 7 p.m. Visitors at this hour weren't common in their neighborhood. He stood up and walked to the door, thinking it might be a neighbor or someone from the neighborhood association, though he couldn't imagine why anyone would be calling at this hour. He opened the door, and there she stood, Linda, the new HOA representative. Linda's gaze was cold, almost clinical, as she looked up at him. She wasn't the warm, welcoming type. Her posture was rigid, her expression sharp, as though she were carrying the weight of an unspoken authority. "Good evening," she said, her voice formal and unfazed. "I'm Linda, the new HOA representative for this block." James forced a smile, stepping aside to let her in. He'd heard whispers about her from other neighbors. People said she was a stickler for the rules, someone who liked to micromanage every little detail in the neighborhood. But he didn't expect her to show up at his door like this, unannounced. "Can I help you with something?" James asked, trying to sound polite. Linda wasted no time. "There's an issue with noise," she began, her voice unwavering. "I've had multiple complaints from neighbors, and I'm here to address it." She stepped into the hallway, glancing around with a sharp eye, as though evaluating everything in her line of sight. James felt a knot form in his stomach. "Noise? I'm not sure I understand." "My daughter is in the living room, and it's your daughter, Grace," Linda interrupted, cutting him off. "I've heard reports about disturbances coming from your home, and I need to make sure this stops." You can't keep disregarding the rules. James' heart dropped. He had no idea what she was talking about. Grace, his sweet girl, who rarely made a sound louder than a laugh, had never caused a problem. She's disabled, Linda, James said, trying to remain calm. There's no loud music or partying. If Grace drops something or makes a sound, it's by accident. Linda's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a tight line. I don't care about your excuses, she said, her voice colder than before. This is my neighborhood now, and my word is law. If there's any more noise, I'll take legal action. I'll have you fined, and if it gets worse, I'll involve the authorities. The shock of her words hit James like a punch to the gut. You can't do that, he said, his voice rising with frustration. This is our home, and Grace can't control. No, Linda snapped, her voice hard and final. What I can do is ensure that this neighborhood is kept quiet and orderly. You need to keep her in check. If you don't, you'll regret it. She didn't even give him a chance to respond before turning on her heel and leaving. James stood frozen, his hand still gripping the doorknob, staring after her as she walked away without a second glance. The door shut with a quiet thud, but the weight of Linda's words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Inside, Grace looked up at her father, sensing something was wrong. Who was that? She asked softly. James tried to keep his composure as he knelt beside her. It was just the new HOA rep. Don't worry, everything's fine, he lied, brushing his hand through her hair. But deep down, he knew nothing was fine. Linda had made her mark, and she wasn't going to stop. Evidence: this moment sets the stage for Linda's increasing obsession with control over the neighborhood, showing her manipulative and threatening nature. She makes it clear that she'll stop at nothing to maintain authority, even at the expense of an innocent family. The weeks that followed Linda's first visit felt like an escalating storm. The peaceful rhythm of the Grant family's life began to unravel, bit by bit. At first, James tried to brush off Linda's complaints, convincing himself that she would tire of her obsession with them. But Linda didn't let up. In fact, her demands grew more absurd and intrusive with each passing day. It started with small things, insignificant noises that she would latch onto. Grace, who spent most of her days at home with her father, had a tendency to accidentally knock things over or make minor noises while going about her day. A dropped book. A chair scraping across the floor. Nothing that warranted a complaint, but to Linda, it was a cause for concern. One afternoon, James was in his home office, sketching out plans for a new project when he heard the doorbell ring. He opened the door to find Linda standing there, arms crossed, her expression severe. I've received multiple complaints about loud noises from your home again, she stated coldly. This has to stop, James. I've warned you, and I don't appreciate being ignored. I told you, James said, his voice growing tense. Grace isn't capable of making loud noises. She can't control when she drops something or shifts in her chair. There's no need for all these complaints. Linda didn't seem to care about his explanations. You've been warned. This is your last chance before I take further action. The neighbors are fed up. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving James standing frozen, trying to keep his anger in check. Grace had heard the entire exchange from the living room and looked at her father with worry in her eyes. Dad, am I causing trouble? She asked, her voice soft, almost apologetic. James swallowed the lump in his throat, his heart aching. No, baby, you're not. It's just her, she doesn't understand. But Linda wasn't the type of person to back down. The next few days brought more complaints, first, about the sound of Grace laughing while watching a TV show, then about the noise from a few footsteps in the hallway. The accusations became more ridiculous, and Linda's tone more hostile. One evening, after yet another complaint, James had had enough. He marched across the street to Linda's house, his fists clenched in frustration. He knocked firmly on her door, waiting impatiently until she answered. Linda, this has gone too far," James said, his voice low but full of anger. "We've done everything we can to accommodate your absurd complaints, but this is getting out of hand. Grace is a disabled young woman, she can't help the noises she makes, and we're not going to let you harass her anymore." Linda's face twisted into a sneer. "You think I'm harassing you?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm simply enforcing the rules, something you seem to think you're above. Maybe if you spent more time controlling your daughter, the neighbors wouldn't have to complain. I'm giving you a chance to fix this, but if you don't expect me to back down." James stared at her, fury and disbelief flashing in his eyes. "You don't get it, do you? She's not like other kids. She needs understanding and patience, not your constant threats. If you think this is about noise, you're wrong. This is about control. You're trying to break us." Linda's eyes hardened, and she gave him a tight-lipped smile. "I'm not trying to break you, James. I'm just trying to fix your little problem." She slammed the door in his face, leaving him standing on her porch, fuming. It was then that James realized something far more insidious was happening. It wasn't just about the noise anymore. It wasn't about her following some set of HOA rules. Linda had become fixated on them, on Grace. On their family. As the days went by, it was clear that Linda wasn't going to let up. She began showing up at odd hours, making accusations even when nothing had happened. One day, James was outside working on the garden, and he heard a familiar voice from behind him. "You know, I've heard complaints about your yard now," Linda said, her tone dripping with disdain. "The garden is an eyesore. If you want to keep your house in this neighborhood, you'll need to tidy up." James turned to face her, his patience fraying. "This is ridiculous. Our garden is fine. It's no different from anyone else's. What is it that you want, Linda? I want you to follow the rules, and if you don't, I'll make sure the neighborhood knows about your issues." She gave him a pointed look, and for the first time, James saw the real malice behind her cold eyes. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was looking for any excuse to break him. It was clear now. Linda was waging a personal war against them. No matter how much they complied, it would never be enough. Every action, every apology, was met with further demands. The pressure was unbearable, and the tension in the household grew. Evidence: as the conflict escalates, Linda's manipulation becomes more clear. She's not just following rules, she's fixated on breaking the Grant family down. The more James defends Grace, the more Linda targets them. This shift makes it obvious that this isn't just a fight over noise, it's a personal vendetta against them. The evening air was thick with tension. James sat at the kitchen table, going over some work, his mind preoccupied with the mounting pressure. Across the room, Grace was curled up on the couch, lost in a book. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the stillness, until, of course, the doorbell rang. James' heart sank. He didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. The uninvited guest. Linda. He stood up slowly, trying to shake off the anxiety that always crept in whenever she appeared at their door. It had become an all too familiar routine, her unannounced visits, her accusations, her demands. But this time, he wasn't going to let her rattle him. He'd had enough. Opening the door, James was immediately struck by the icy coldness in Linda's eyes. But this time, there was something different, something darker. "James," she said, her voice low and measured. "I've had enough of your excuses. Enough of your daughter's behavior disturbing the neighborhood. You've had your chances to make this right, and now there will be consequences." James felt a chill run down his spine. He swallowed hard. "Linda, you've made your point. Grace isn't doing anything wrong, and I'm not going to stand here and listen to you berate her anymore. You've got to stop." Linda didn't back down. In fact, she stepped closer to him, almost nose to nose. "You don't understand, do you? Her voice dropped to a near whisper, sharp as a blade. This isn't just about noise anymore. This is about control. You're a problem, Grace is a problem, and now you're forcing my hand. The words hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken threats. James could feel his heart racing. He had never seen Linda like this, so unhinged, so unpredictable. It was as if the woman who had always been calm and calculated had snapped, and now, he was face to face with someone who had lost all sense of reason. Before James could respond, the door to the living room creaked open. Grace, always curious, peeked her head out, her face full of confusion. She had overheard the heated exchange and stepped forward, hoping to defuse the situation. "Dad?" Grace asked softly, her voice laced with concern. Linda's eyes locked onto her, and for a brief moment, James saw something sinister flicker in her gaze. Grace was vulnerable, standing there in front of Linda, completely unaware of the danger closing in. "Stay out of this, Grace," Linda sneered. "You're the reason this is happening." In a flash, everything shifted. With a speed James didn't expect, Linda lunged forward, grabbing Grace by the arm and shoving her against the wall. Grace cried out in pain, the sudden force throwing her off balance. James moved toward them in a panic, but before he could reach her, Linda's other hand revealed the blade, a kitchen knife, glinting menacingly in the dim light. Everything seemed to slow down. The fear coursing through James was overwhelming as he watched Linda raise the knife, her face contorted in fury. The sound of Grace's scream was drowned out by the rush of blood pounding in his ears. He ran forward, shouting, but it was too late. Linda plunged the knife into Grace's side, a sickening thud echoing in the room as it sank deep. James felt a surge of panic flood his chest, his vision blurring. The room seemed to spin as he reached out, grabbing Linda's wrist and trying to pull her away, but her grip was ironclad. "No!" James shouted, his voice hoarse with horror. "You're sick. What have you done?" Grace slumped to the floor, her eyes wide in shock, the pain overwhelming her. Blood began to pool around her, staining the carpet beneath her. James fell to his knees beside her, desperately trying to stop the bleeding with his hands, his mind racing. He had to get her to the hospital. He had to, but in that split second of chaos, the camera on the wall caught everything. James had installed surveillance cameras around the house months ago, anticipating nothing more than petty vandalism or neighborhood disputes. But now, the footage was priceless. Linda, the woman who had tormented them for months, had no idea that her violent act had been captured. James knew that it would be the key to her undoing. As he held Grace in his arms, her labored breathing growing weaker by the second, his thoughts weren't on the police, or the emergency room. They were on one thing: revenge. Justice would be served. The camera had captured it all. The moment Linda raised the knife. The moment she thrust it into Grace. The moment she stood over Grace's crumpled body with a look of satisfaction on her face, as if she had finally won. James could barely think straight through the adrenaline and fear, but he knew this: Linda had made the biggest mistake of her life. She didn't know they had cameras. She didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know we were watching, she didn't know we had cameras. Evidence. The intensity of this scene is fueled by the unexpected violence, the deep emotional turmoil of watching Grace get hurt, and the realization that Linda's actions have been recorded. The conflict escalates into a life-or-death moment, with Linda believing she could get away with the crime, only to have her actions documented. The ambulance arrived in a blur of red and flashing lights. James barely remembered how he got Grace into the vehicle, his hands shaking as he tried to comfort her, telling her everything would be okay, even though he knew deep down that things might never be okay again. As the paramedics rushed her into the ER, the world around him felt like it had slowed to a standstill. It wasn't until the officers arrived that the reality of what had just happened began to set in. Linda had fled the scene after the attack, leaving Grace behind in a pool of blood. The police arrived moments later, taking statements from James, who could hardly recall any details. His mind was still racing, the image of Linda's cold, triumphant face haunting him. I don't know what to say," James stammered, still in shock. "She just attacked her. Out of nowhere. I didn't even see it coming." The officer nodded sympathetically, taking notes. "We'll need to process the scene and gather evidence. Can you think of anything that might help us? Any video footage?" James felt a rush of relief. He didn't have to think twice. "Yes, I have cameras. I installed them around the house a while ago. I'll show you the footage. It's all on there." The officer's expression shifted. "Good. That's exactly what we need." Minutes later, James found himself sitting in his living room with the officer, his hand hovering over the laptop as they watched the footage together. The camera caught everything: Linda's arrival at the door, her argument with him, her violent assault on Grace. Every moment was crystal clear, the rawness of the attack impossible to deny. The footage was damning. As the images played out, James felt a mix of emotions. There was anger, disbelief, but also a strange sense of justice. The cameras had done what he couldn't. They had captured Linda's brutal, unprovoked attack. There was no doubt now, she would be held accountable. But as the footage continued, James noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. Linda's behavior on the video was even worse than he had remembered. She hadn't simply attacked Grace in a fit of rage. She had taken her time, her expression almost enjoying the violence. It was cold. Calculated. The officer leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "This is solid evidence, Mr. Grant. You did the right thing by having these cameras. Now, we have a clear record of what happened, and we can proceed with the investigation. We'll bring her in for questioning." Linda had no idea the evidence was already in the hands of the police. As the officers left to begin their search for her, James couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creep in. The woman who had tried to destroy his family, who had hurt Grace so viciously, would soon face the consequences of her actions. But what if she tried to lie her way out of it? What if she tried to manipulate the truth? As James sat there, his mind racing through the possibilities, he couldn't shake the feeling that Linda was not done yet. She was calculating, manipulative, and she had a way of making people believe her. She might try to deny everything, to twist the narrative in her favor, and James knew that the only way to ensure Grace got justice was to keep the pressure on, to make sure the truth never got buried. The hours dragged on as the police launched a manhunt for Linda. But in the back of his mind, James knew one thing for certain: the truth would come out. It always did. The next day, Linda was arrested and brought in for questioning. She denied everything, of course. "I didn't hurt her," she insisted, her voice rising with indignation. "It's all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to set things right. She attacked me first." But no one was buying her story. The footage spoke for itself. Linda's lies crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The police had her in their sights, and the case was already stacking against her. James could finally breathe a little easier, though the anxiety in his chest hadn't fully faded. He had no doubt that justice would be served, but it wasn't just about Linda anymore. It was about protecting his daughter, about making sure that Grace's voice would finally be heard, loud and clear. Evidence. The investigation takes a pivotal turn with the discovery of the footage, setting the stage for Linda's downfall. The rising tension comes from Linda's attempts to justify her actions, and the overwhelming power of the evidence that ultimately exposes her lies. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable in the air. James sat at the back, his hands tightly clasped in his lap, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened in the past few weeks. Grace, though recovering physically, had been deeply shaken by the attack. The trauma of the incident had left scars far deeper than the ones on her body, and she struggled to sleep at night, haunted by flashes of that moment when Linda's knife had cut into her side. Now, they were here, in the place where everything would finally come to a head. Linda, dressed in her stiff, formal attire, sat across the courtroom, her eyes never quite meeting those of James or Grace. She had tried to maintain an air of calm throughout the proceedings, but her tight-lipped smile and the occasional glance at her lawyer betrayed her growing unease. James had kept his emotions in check during the trial. The pain of seeing Linda, the woman who had caused so much harm to his daughter, sit there so confidently was almost unbearable. But he knew that his anger had to take a back seat to the truth, and the truth was clear: Linda had attacked Grace, and the evidence had laid bare her brutal, premeditated actions. The footage from the cameras had been crucial in bringing the case to court, and it had turned the tide in their favor. The prosecutor had played it in front of the jury, the rawness of the moment echoing in the silence of the courtroom. The image of Linda standing over Grace, knife in hand, was something no one could forget. As the trial progressed, Linda's defense faltered. She tried to paint herself as a victim of circumstances, claiming that she had been pushed to her limits by the chaotic behavior of James and Grace. She suggested that she had acted out of a sense of duty to the neighborhood, that she had only wanted to set things right. But no one was buying it. The testimony from the neighbors who had been so quick to complain about Grace fell apart under cross-examination. They hadn't heard the sounds Linda had claimed they heard, and they hadn't been bothered by anything out of the ordinary. It became clear that Linda had been fabricating the complaints all along, using her position of power as a way to torment the Grant family. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury deliberated. The minutes dragged by like hours, but eventually, they returned to the courtroom. The foreman stood up, his voice steady but filled with finality. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Linda Marshall, guilty of aggravated assault and attempted murder." A wave of relief washed over James, though it was tempered with a deep sadness. Justice had been served, but it hadn't come without a price. Grace's life had been forever changed by this woman's actions, and while the verdict would bring her some peace, it wouldn't undo the damage. The judge turned to Linda, his expression stern. "You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison for your crimes. Your actions were not just an attack on an individual, but on the fabric of the community you swore to protect. I trust that you will reflect on the harm you've caused." Linda's face remained impassive, though there was a flicker of anger in her eyes. She hadn't expected to be caught, let alone convicted. For all her manipulation and control, she had underestimated the strength of the Grant family, and the power of truth. As the guards led her out of the courtroom, James's thoughts turned to Grace. She had been through hell, but now, there was hope. Hope for a future free from fear, free from the woman who had terrorized them for so long. The resolution wasn't just about the sentence, though. It was about the closure for Grace, the understanding that she had a right to exist in peace. It was about James, who had fought tooth and nail to protect his daughter and make sure that the truth had been heard. As they walked out of the courtroom together, Grace turned to her father, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "We won." James smiled back, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Yes, we did. They had fought for justice. And they had won." Evidence: the resolution provides an emotional payoff, as the family's long journey through pain and suffering culminates in Linda's conviction. The sense of justice and closure is earned through their persistence and the undeniable evidence. The final moments show how the Grant family has come out stronger, with Grace finding some peace despite the scars left behind. If you believe in standing up for what's right and holding people accountable, then don't let this story end here. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more powerful stories that challenge injustice and inspire change. Share this video with others who need to hear this message, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together, we can create a world where truth always prevails.